Yeah.
I would say I'm definitely not an expert, certainly not in agriculture anymore. I haven't been involved in that for many years. So if any of you are agricultural people and you want to ask big questions about that, I'm more practical than academic for sure. And really my knowledge of Africa and my thoughts that I want to share with you today are from my own experience rather than, and a lot of my own reading and my own journey. And I'm still learning a lot. We've been 45, my wife and I, 45 years in the mission, in a mission context, work for many years. And 40 of those years in Africa, around Africa in different places. I think, I wouldn't know exactly, but over 30 countries I've been to. So half of Africa. I've been to Malawi 3 or 4 times. So I know a little bit of your context if most of you are from Malawi. Yeah, just to give you an overview of where I think I'd like to go. Some of you might like that. I want to just give an introduction to Africa so that we all understand. Some of you are African, some are not. I'm not. There are things I can't say that other people can say. But I want to just start by at least being on the same page together, what we see today in Africa. Then I'd like to have a little bit of look at history and what is the real challenge, what's the reality and what is the challenge that we have today in Africa. And then I want to suggest a response. I want to look at the Reformation and transformation a little bit. And then I'd like to suggest a few steps of what we could actually do. Okay, so I hope I don't lose you here. To me, my own journey, but also in general, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of a journey. What do you think of when you go on a trip? You want to go, you've just gone to Albania. We travel, maybe not so much the last 2 years, but we're still traveling. What do you think of on a journey? What do you really need apart from food and water and so on, you know, and maybe a good vehicle or whatever if you're in Africa. But I'd like to suggest there are 3 things that we need. Okay, one is a map, having a good map. And I'll just lose you here a minute and share my screen with you if I can. There we go. Okay, firstly, the first picture here is obviously, where are we? Start at the front so you can see others. We need to get where do we want to go on our journey? You see these 2 fellas? Do you know who they are? Anyone? They're Tuareg in the Sahara, the Tuareg people or the blue men. And they're looking at that mountain peak there thinking, let's go there. What do we need to get there? And so the first thing I'd like to suggest is that we need here's when we went across the desert as a family. Many, many years ago. I've been across the Sahara several times, but this gives you a picture of my former state. Okay, we want to know, where are we going? And there's all sorts of things that come with that. But the first thing that helps us is a map. And a map can be, it can give us the big picture. It can give us a perspective. It can give us, you know, it can outline a lot of areas where we possibly could go. And we need to know how to read a map and to know where we're going to go. Okay. The thing with maps is that you realize that somebody else has been there. Okay. Otherwise you wouldn't have the map. So somebody's been there, and maybe you want to go somewhere in your journey that nobody's been yet, and there is no map. Okay, so what are the kind of things that that we could think of in terms of a map? If we if we rely on the map alone, then we have to realize that we're just following somebody else's journey. Okay, and that may be fine. You feel safe, you feel secure, and you're happy with that. I've not always been happy with that, just having a map and going where someone else. I want to do something new, you see. So the second thing that we could have is a signpost. And when you're out on your road and you come to a roundabout or you come to an intersection, you're always looking for a signpost that says, okay, this is the way to go to your destination. Okay, and signposts are very helpful because they can give you a clear, distinct place, you know, where to go when you're at that junction in your journey. Okay, that previous picture in the Sahara, I want to tell you, I don't know if anyone has done that journey, but there are not many signposts out there. There used to be a big barrel every 5 kilometers, but people would play with those barrels, and so you didn't actually know whether you're on the safe place or not. And we had a rule: if you went for 20 kilometers and you hadn't seen any, you go back to where you came from and you wait till and figure out another direction. And the third thing is a compass, as you see in this picture here. And the compass may be the most useful thing that you can have on your journey, because it can orientate you towards the direction depending on, or only on, the fixed laws of nature, you know, of reality. You know exactly where north is and so on. One of the things we discovered, though, in the desert is you must at least be 10 meters away from your truck to use the compass effectively. Otherwise, the magnetism of the truck will mess you up. So don't forget that. So if we think of our journey and these three things that we could have, it's like the journey of transformation, of seeing change come in Africa. These are the kind of things I'd like to suggest. A bit of a compass for you, a map to give a bigger picture, and some signposts along the way this afternoon. That's my goal. All right. Of course, today we have these things, and with your GPS, you don't need any of them, maybe. But anyway, I'm still too old-fashioned to just rely on my telephone. All right, so that's an introduction about the journey of transformation. Let's look at Africa a little bit itself. And I'm certainly hoping that anything I say today about Africa, I'm certainly not judgmental. I love the continent of Africa. I love Africans. It's what I've been living for years. And so rather than me give a summary of it, I'm returning to a Nigerian lady who's become quite a well-known author, and she has written about this. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. You may have heard of her. She's quite a well-known author. She recently wrote a book, a very honest book, on grief. It's just called simply Grief, and it's short stories of what she just went through in the last year and a half, losing her father to COVID. And it's a very good read, very easy read as well. Okay, but she says this. He said, when you think of Africa, this is the stereotype of what you think of. Okay, places of beautiful landscapes, rivers, lakes, forests, deserts. Then in those deserts and forests, you have animals of all kinds just roaming around, you know, this idyllic picture. But then also, she said, there's many people think we can't understand Africans and their senseless wars and so on. They don't understand the people dying of poverty and disease like malaria and AIDS. And those, she says, the stereotype of the people who don't know how to speak for themselves. People waiting to be saved from the outside by a kind white foreigner. Now, that's what she says is her perception of many non-Africans. And I offer that to you. I don't agree with it, of course, but it is a true stereotype. Africa, however, is a continent extremely blessed. It is not cursed. And I think there's been a lot written about that, particularly in Christian circles, how Africa has been cursed and so on. I do not believe it is cursed. It is a blessed place, but it is broken. Okay, but so much of the world is broken these days. Okay, so it's not unique in that way. Many nations are broken. And how do we see change come? Africa is also portrayed at times as the orphaned continent. Okay, but I just want to say right up front, Father God is looking at this continent with compassion and with a desire to meet its needs. So let's have a little overview of Africa, how big it is and how beautiful it is. I mean, as an African, many of you or some of you are Africans. I can't see all of you here on the screen, but for those of you who are not, what attracts you to Africans? You know, it's their liveliness, their worship in church just draws you in. The African is a communicator. I have not, the last 15 years when I lived in Senegal, I have not had anyone, even as young as 5 years old, that you give them a microphone and they don't know what to say. They communicate. They are superb at it. And redeemed that gift, they are the best evangelists in the world. I think I know many in Europe that have done amazing jobs at planting churches. Africans are the ones that have evangelized Europe as well as anyone over the last decade or two. Okay, Africans are amazing sports people. As we used to joke a couple of years ago when France won the World Cup, well, it's not really the French team, that's an African team. And there's truth in that. So on. Okay, Africa is a huge country. Many of you have probably seen, this diagram many times before. The very first, just to put it in perspective for myself, when I first joined Mission, my very first experience was I bicycled across the United States of America. So from one side to the other, which is about 5,000 kilometers. And then when I saw this map many years later, I thought, wow, I've only got halfway across Africa. Okay, so you've probably seen that before. This one I got last week, I saw, and I thought, wow, that gives an interesting perspective. So from one side of Russia to the furthest side, which looks enormous on our maps, is 6,400 kilometers. But if you go from Dakar across to the other side, to the Horn of Africa, it's 7,200. That perspective is not often seen when you look at a map. So Africa is huge. 22% of the world mass. I think I am just going to go out of here so I can get a bigger share. There we go. Okay, but it only has 15% of the world population, just over 1 billion people. But it's the youngest continent by a long way. And by 2050, the statistics say that 1 in 4 of the world will be an African. And probably half of them will be under 19 years of age. Okay. It contains, and some of these figures you may know, but I just want to throw them out there for you. It contains 40% of the world's, 43 actually, percent of the world's natural resources are found in the ground in Africa. That's nearly half of all your gold, diamonds, all sorts of minerals and so on. So what a resource, but also what a responsibility. Some of the world's greatest rivers are found there, and you know them, the Nile, the Niger, the Congo. I just discovered recently that the Congo, my daughter works in the Congo, so I'm interested to find out more about it there. It's the deepest river in the world, the Congo River, up to 200 meters deep. That's a significant resource. And of course, that's fantastic for hydropower and all those kind of things. So there's a rich history there of Africans over the years that have, some of the kingdoms that have been in Africa, the Ghana kingdom, the Mali kingdom, of course. And just recently, I don't know if you've seen the articles that have come out as they've tried to discover who actually has been the richest person in the world throughout history. And we might think very quickly of Jeff Bezos or Mr. Tesla, but actually it's a Malian by the name of Mansa Musa, who they put his worth at $400 billion. And he was an incredibly rich guy quite a number of centuries ago in the height of the Mali Empire. Okay. There's a biblical history too. I won't go into all that. Noah's family, of course, came to Africa. Abraham visited when there was famine. Joseph came, then his father came. Jacob, Jesus came to Africa. We know that Simon of Cyrene carried the cross of Jesus. He was a Libyan. Cyrene is in Libya. And of course, there's a number of church fathers from the early centuries, like names that you would know, Tertullian, Cyprian, Augustine, who lived in what is today Algeria. I've been to the cathedral there where he preached to a very full cathedral at least twice a day back in his time. And then more recently, we think of names of Nelson Mandela, Boutros Ghali, Kofi Annan, Desmond Tutu, and so on, that are well-known Africans giving world leadership today. And of course, the most recent one that we've all got to know, I think, is the Ethiopian Tedros, and I don't know if I'm going to say his name right, Ghebreyesus, of the director of WHO, the World Health Organization. We've seen him on TV often in the last while. All right. Recent history, I'm not going to go through that too much. I think you know that independence came in the 60s. It was excitement, it was the honeymoon, and by the 70s, the honeymoon was over and things started to go bad. And by the 80s, there were a lot of, and I'll give you just a few here, most of the African countries were in decline. Time magazine cover read, "Nowhere is there a continent more miserable. The third world of the third world." That was in 1980. 32 of the world's poorest 40 nations were in the continent at the time. And there was suggestions, let's just leave Africa and focus on Asia and so on. Not a good idea. Then the 90s came and there was a response and there was some hope restored. I think people in general were frustrated and some change started to happen. And now as we go into the new millennium, there's a hard reality, but a response is happening and we're seeing some real advancement in a number of countries. We saw the Arab Spring in North Africa, which made a huge impact. We've seen a number of challenging things, but so countries like Namibia, Angola, Ghana, Botswana, Mali, all went through in the last 5-10 years, have gone through some real positive growth and development. Okay. I think Malawi also is turning a corner, if I'm reading things right. Okay, but it's recognized generally that there's still plenty of challenges and we need to move further. Yeah, I think if you've heard some recent speeches by some of the leaders in the continent, you'll be very encouraged, particularly the one by Ghanaian President Akufo-Addo when Macron visited him during last year at one point. That is, you can YouTube that and find that speech. It was a fantastic speech. And I thought if all African leaders own this, we will see some wonderful things happen. Even Macron stood there on the other podium looking at him like, I can't believe I'm hearing this. This is great. Okay, so let's look at the reality itself, some of the challenges that are there. As I said, tremendous blessing, but the challenges continue to be there. And maybe I don't need to go into all of them. Obviously, if you go back far enough, colonialism in terms of Europe, when it was involved, that was a tremendous challenge. But there's always been other things: power, control, conflict, corruption, injustice, and so on. These are all big issues that are still very much part of the African worldview there. Yeah, of course, I think we have to take some part of the responsibility. The question we need to ask is, let's ask where does Africa get its guns and weapons and everything else from? It's all from the West. And I think you all know which countries in the West that loves to sell ammunition. So there's a real there's an interest, there's an agenda for Western nations to keep some of these things going because it is good business. Okay, now the greatest challenges I think today would be poverty. There's still 34 of the poorest 50 nations in the world are in Africa. Corruption would be another one. Kenya, just to give a couple of examples here, Kenya, which according to the census in Kenya, 80% of Kenyans are Christians, and yet it's the number 2 most corrupt nation in the world. We need to ask questions about this. In Chad, this is a few years ago now, but the European Union gave a 40 million euro gift for the medical clinics out in the countries, out in the bush, and they clandestinely or secretly monitored that. They wanted to see where it was going, and they discovered after a couple of years that 1% actually arrived in the clinics and dispensaries in the villages. So 99% was siphoned off into pockets along the way. And I don't think that is unusual. Okay. The total aid, and I don't want to sound bad, and I know I have lots of Swiss friends, but this is the reality here. The total aid that goes into Africa is about the same as what comes out of Africa and goes into Swiss banks. Okay, just so that we understand that that is a huge issue. Then, of course, we're still dealing with disease. I don't need to say anything about that. Lack of education as well. Even Senegal, where we've lived the last years, the only reason that the literacy rate was up to 60% was because they counted all the young children starting at as young as 4 going to Quranic school in the official figures. But if you didn't count those, the literacy rate would be still well under 50%. So there's still a big issue there. So Darrow Miller, I'm sure many of you would know the name, the author of Discipling the Nations, calls this the great heartbreaking paradox. And of course, we should be asking why. The gap between the blessing and the current reality is just too big, and we need to seek some solutions. There's some positive signs. I think over the last 3 or 4 years now, there have been 30 countries have changed political power or leaders democratically in relative peace, which is great. It may be over a longer period, actually. I don't think it's the last 3 or 4 years, which is a good sign. Also, the judicial trials that have happened, for example, Hassan Habre of Chad was tried, who's been in exile in Senegal for many years. When he was ousted, he was put on trial in Senegal by an African jury and was convicted and is serving time for that. Okay, Abdoulaye Wade's son, Karim, who was a minister under his dad's government, in his government, actually had 8 portfolios and was able to use that to great effect. And he was tried, when the new president came in, he was tried and convicted again also by a local jury for his embezzlement of funds. We see also that the International Criminal Court has put Fatou Bensouda, who's a Gambian lawyer, in as the head prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, which is, and of course the UN has had several of its leaders have been African of late, Boutros Ghali first, then followed by the Ghanaian Kofi Annan, and that's been positive, but they couldn't actually do that much in Africa, and Kofi Annan certainly was more effective outside of Africa than in it. Mo Ibrahim, the Sudanese tele businessman, he's involved in the tele companies, who offers a prize for outstanding leadership to African leadership annually, and I recommend his website. I think it's just called Mo Ibrahim, and he does a lot of research into the situation into Africa. Very, very resourceful website. But this is what he says. He says, Africa has gone from a season of Afro-pessimism to Afro-optimism, but is now entering into Afro-realism in the second decade of the new millennium. He notes there's a huge potential and that growth is happening, yet Africa must prioritize regional integration, reduction of inequality, here's some of the key things, employment of youth, and the good governance of resources. An emphasis on ensuring good governance and security across its institutions are paramount to begin with. That's what he's advising. Now, he gives a prize to the most outstanding political leader or leader in the continent each year. He went several years without finding anyone that he could give it to. So that says something in itself. This year, I believe it was the president of Niger, that won it. Well, that received it, I should say, didn't win it. Okay, so how do we respond? This is, I think, a Christian foundation as we look at how can we respond. Africa has been evangelized, but the African mind has not been captured for Christ or transformed. That's a quote from Dr. Tukumba, the late Dr. Tukumba Adiyama, who was the head of the African Evangelical Alliance for a number of years. And he's referring here, of course, to Romans 12, verse 2, which will come up a few times yet, where we need to be transformed. Anything can be transformed by the renewing of our mind, the way we think about things, the way we see things. If Africa is cursed at all, as some are suggesting, it is only because it has believed in lies. okay? And so is many parts of the rest of the world. How many of us have not believed in some lies? We all have. But I want to suggest in Africa, as I've read, that in terms of the Christian response and the Christian foundation, I think missionaries and the church have a responsibility here. Evangelism has taken place, but too little discipleship, truth to live by, has happened. The gospel of salvation, not the gospel of the kingdom, has been preached. Jesus is the answer, yes. Now, I'm not an Assemblies of God person, but if anybody wants to shout hallelujah or amen or something, feel free to. Jesus is the answer, yes.
Amen.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Okay, but not just in evangelism, but in life, everything. So not just Sunday morning, during the week, but the real response is that we need to see the kingdom of God and how it can make an impact. So often discipleship is divorced from development or the gospel doesn't include the transformation of community. Discipleship, I think, was in fact spiritualized, so it has no domain or no input into physical, social, or other spheres. Individuals were saved, but not communities transformed. Christianity is supposed to be 24/7, but it is often just 2 hours on Sunday. Okay, or if you're Assemblies of God, for Jeremiah, maybe 3 or 4 hours. Okay, it's the gospel of changed hearts, baby, but not of transformed minds. And herein lies one of our keys. Focus has been on the future city, heaven, if you like, but not on the present garden, earth. It gives a sense of escapism out of the present misery into a future hope. This is what Matai Wangari, if you've read any of her books, the noted Nobel Prize winner for her work in rural Kenya, and as a parliamentarian, she suggested in her book, The Challenge for Africa, a very good read. She says that the negative effect missionaries have brought to Africa is that in getting folks to accept Jesus, they get security for eternity, but they never told how they should live now. So that's an issue we have to face. Now, that's a modern voice. Just recently, going back many years, Bishop Cyprian of Carthage, in what is today Tunisia, he was a church father in 256. He said this, "Beloved brethren, we are philosophers not in words, but in deeds. We exhibit our wisdom not by our dress, but by truth. We know virtues by practice rather than through boasting of them. We do not speak great things, but we live them." And so I think one of our keys is that the church must find a new integrity and practice what it preaches. How do we respond? God has a destiny for Africa. Okay. Paul Boating, who's a Ghanaian, but is now engaged in politics in the UK. I heard him speak a couple of years ago, and he told the story. He said, Africa is like an eaglet, a small eagle, a young eagle, that is living with chickens and has not learned how to fly yet. It needs to be taken to the cliff and pushed off, and then it will soar like it was born to be, but cannot do in a chicken coop. Okay. So I think a challenge needs to take place where Africans with their potential can move forward. Potential is all that we could be, but have not yet become. That's a quote, and I don't know who it's from, but I like it a lot. Okay, potential is what we could be, but we haven't yet become. So let's dream about that potential. Ask ourselves what Africa could look like, and then take responsibility to make that happen. The continent has a growing church. I'm sure you all know that. But the transformation just has not happened yet. There's a renowned atheist, and many of you may have seen this article that did the rounds a few years ago, Matthew Paris, who wrote an article for the Times newspaper, and in it he said this: Africa needs missionaries. And as an atheist, this came from a corner that not many people expected. And he said, not aid from governments or NGOs, as they will never change the people. What is needed, he declares, is a change of thinking. The crushing passivity of the people's mindset is the greatest issue. So here he again is affirming it's the way we are thinking. It's the thing, how we think about things, that's keeping us held back. A Kikuyu proverb from Kenya says, if you want to get rid of something bad, you must have something of value to replace it. What is that valuable thing that we want to replace with it? Okay. Della Adadevo, who is a Ghanaian living in the US, and he brings together, he facilitates leadership of politicians and Christian leaders, spiritual leaders, pastors and so on. And he's penned a poem called A New Africa. Now, a lot of these things, including my notes, they're up on my website, which I can give to you. You can post it at the end if you like. And this is also on the website, so you can get it. But let me just read you a few stanzas of this poem, I See a New Africa. He says, I see a new Africa where light is dispelling darkness. The light of Jesus Christ is shining in every corner of the continent. It is shining on people of all races, languages, genders, and ages. I see a new Africa where the ignorance of the people is being replaced with enlightenment. Yes, enlightenment with truth. I see a new Africa where truth is setting people free. The chains of deception and superstition are being broken. The land is filled with people who are pursuing knowledge, people who are eagerly seeking all the truth about all of God's creation. I see a new Africa where justice is flowing like a rushing stream. Women are free to pursue their dreams. They no longer have to compromise their dignity in order to have success to opportunities that are really available to their male counterparts. I see a new Africa where eyes of the children are filled with hope for a better tomorrow. The wailings of mothers in the villages and towns over children that have died from malaria, malnourishment, and other curable diseases have reduced greatly. The street children who had been enslaved to drugs and abandoned to hopelessness have filled the classrooms. They are pursuing education with enviable career and service ambitions. I see a new Africa where leaders are servants of the people. Fear is no longer the weapon to keep people in subjection. Workers are duly rewarded for their labor. A free people are uplifting in action around a common vision of a free and prosperous Africa. I see a new Africa where her children are no longer slaves to foreign lands, standing in long queues, seeking greener pastures elsewhere. I see a new Africa where the youth love their land and joyfully labor to make it the envy of other nations. And so on. I think that you get the idea. What's the picture we have of an Africa we would love to see? Okay, let me just go back to a couple more pictures here, I think. Okay, there's a couple of cows in my home country. One of them looks like it could be a Swiss one, but they're looking through the fence at the green, tall, lush grass on the other side. And how often has that been the case? Huh? Okay, I'm not able to get this. Sometimes the chains that prevent us from being free are more in our minds than in, I mean, this animal can go anywhere it wants to. It's just tied to a chair. It's not tied to anything. Okay? But we feel like we're tied up and we need to be set free. Okay? And then this picture here, you know, we just need to let go, but we don't want to let go of those things that are important. This monkey wants the banana. He's not going to let go of it for nothing. What are the things that we want to, that we need to let go of in order to move forward? Catherine Booth, who was William Booth's daughter, she was in Paris, sent there by her father and said, go change that city. And she made this, she was a woman of faith. Wow. She said this, we have to disturb the present in order to better the future. Okay? Many of us want different results, but keep doing the same things. We have to start doing different things. So what are we looking at that we just feel like we can't get to? What are we still tied to in our minds that we need to let go and think in a new way about? And what are we holding on to from the past that says, okay, let me just show these, then I want to, I've got two more slides here. Okay, you get that? Okay, change, how does change happen? I thought she was just going upstairs to change, this caterpillar says, and he's still waiting. Okay, it takes time before the butterfly comes out, but we can do it. Okay. Okay, an appropriate response. How are we doing? I always do this. I always have far too much, but I'll put the notes out there for you. You can take it later. Okay, let me suggest a few things. That we need to see Africa in a different way, with a new vision, pregnant with hope for the continent. Okay, as the poem that I just mentioned said. Secondly, in humility, we must accept and take responsibility and ownership together for Africa and her challenges, and be engaged very often in little small ways. That's the way I've always worked, small little projects, okay, and see it make a difference. Thirdly, we must walk out in our daily life the values of the kingdom of God. Okay, the church needs to do that in all spheres of society, okay, with total integrity and commitment to see an impact. We must develop a new worldview of what the kingdom means. What are the kingdom's values that should be impacting us? And I'll come back to that in a few moments, so that we're not dealing with just cultural belief, bondage, and superstition. Next, we must learn to forgive and possibly forget, and move on from the past. Okay. There's a need to leave behind a victim mentality. I think I've encountered this so often. We can't do anything about it. It's so often prevalent, and we need to move to a victor. It is possible. Something can be done, and we're seeing the signs of it. We must discover and acknowledge the root of the issues and not only treat the symptom, the consequences, or the surface signs. Band-aids do not help an infection. Only surgery does. And I think we need to stop putting plasters on things and keep things going. Next, be committed to God and trust Him to give us the capacity and competence to see impact and transformation come. And I think that's a good point to say a word to you, Marcos, and to others that are involved with you, and what I understand you've been doing there in Malawi. Good for you. This is what it takes, is committing and empowering others to be competent and have the capacity to transform. Okay, we must wrestle with the values and understand the values that must be changed. What are the kingdom values, and not just our cultural values, either from the West or from within Africa? Now, my wife and I, as we observed where we lived over the years in Africa, but especially the last few years in Senegal, I just give you a few of the values that I think we need to wrestle with and see changed, because they don't help. Now, this is in Senegal, but I discover it in a lot of other places. And the first one that hits you right off is the fatalism. That's particularly true in the Muslim countries. But everything that happens is God's will. But we find it so prevalent also in the church. Everything that happens, it's God who wills it. Okay. And that includes the poor, disabled, divorce, garbage, ill health, failure in business, and so on and so forth. We just accept it because we think this is what God wants. And we need to rethink that value where it has an impact on us. Women are inferior to men in value and purpose, and children as well. And that's also still very, very prevalent in many church connections. Okay, and I tell you the truth, women have done as much as any men across Africa to see transformation come. Kudos to women who never get or seldom get honored for it, but they're doing it. They hold the community, the society together. That was true in Dakar where we lived. And I heard that told to me by many Muslim, even my local imam and the village chief, he told me that many times. He said, Garry, listen, the people who hold our community together are the women. But there's no place for them. They have no positions of responsibility. So we need to rethink that. Another one would be the way we see failure. You know, failure is not a problem. Most places across Africa, failure is not seen as a problem because we all understand it, we know it. But when someone is successful, everybody gets around and says, so what are you trying to prove? Take it easy. And so there's no incentive to be successful, to see transformation actually happen. We saw this over and over again in our community. Yeah, those are some of the quick ones that I see. Change itself is not a high value. So why, hey, come on, we've lived like this for years. Why should we change? And that becomes an issue then, all right? And lastly, we must work, just under that piece, we must work together to see some of the goals and the vision that we have realized. We talk in our mission, we talk about the Christian Magna Carta, or the NGO world, we talk about the Millennium Goals and so on. What can happen? Just very, very briefly, a connection back to the Reformation, which I have looked at it a little bit, and some of the truth that we can gather from that is to realize that Europe was not, years ago, was also not in a good state. And to try to summarize that quickly, I won't do it justice, but when the Roman Empire fell in 476, and then we went into a period of what's known in history and in our classroom as the Dark Ages. actually there was a lot of good stuff that happened in that period. And the first thing is that people began to think, and people began to be dissatisfied with the way they were living. And so they got together in monasteries, and the monasteries became the place where new values were lived out. Okay. The monasteries moved on with that lifestyle and became cities. And there was three things, excuse me, that were requirements for people to live in the cities back in that day. One was you had to be committed to peace. You could only live in the city if you were not going to fight and go to war. Otherwise, you had to stay outside the city. So that was there. The second one was that they focused on the opportunity for people to work for a living in the city. You could work and earn a living. And lastly, the poor had a guaranteed place that they would be taken care of in the city. So within that city context and those three key values that later were to be built on, Europe was changed. There was a foundation. Then we come to the 1100s, the first universities came up because people began to think differently and began to question things. Do we always have to fight? No, we don't. What can we do about it? And so on. And then the universities came around AD 1100, and I saw a map just recently of the universities across Europe back in the 1200s. They were everywhere. They became the learning places that questioned, what are we doing? How are we living together? Okay. And then, of course, Europe went on to the Renaissance, the Reformation, and finally the Enlightenment. But here's a few things that I think that came out of the Reformation that we could identify with and learn from as we think about transformation in Africa. One is there was a recognition of the authoritative word of God. That was one of the keys. The Bible was translated into the local languages, German, obviously first, English and others, and the printing press came into action at that time. And that revolutionized ideas and thinking that were now in the hands of the people, and they got it. And I'm sure some of you guys know all this stuff. I just want to, for our African brothers, sisters that are there, if you don't know this, I think it's helpful to recognize, why is Europe the place where so many want to come to? Why is it set the bar? Europe wasn't always like this. And these are some of the keys. So that's the first one. Second one, acknowledgement of the sovereignty of God over all spheres of life and not just the church. In other words, God was with us in business. God is with us in our education and so on and so forth as well. Rediscovery of the grace of God in salvation. It was not religious works or indulgences or other widely accepted religious practices that made you right with God. It was the grace of God. And I think we have a pretty good handle on that one across Africa. A refocus of mission in the church that came out of the Reformation, that individual groups of people, across Europe, there was lots of different tribes and people groups. They began to think about the other groups at that time, and that took on they no longer remained ethnocentric, but began to think about others. A new appreciation of the responsibility of the individual before God, and to me, that is a real important one. It's just beyond the community taking something or deciding something, but actually there's individual responsibility. And that was rediscovered through the Reformation period, that I am, as an individual, responsible before God first, and then we as a community, as a family. Okay. And then there were a couple of negative ones. I'm not going to go into that. For example, spiritual gifts ceased at the beginning of the 1st century. And so spiritual gifts, you know, it became reason. We began to think, and we didn't need the spiritual gifts anymore. And I don't think Africa is going to go that way. But we did. And so now of course, that led to the Enlightenment, where we just became very rational in nearly everything we did. And the spirit of many things was left out. Okay. And so in any culture, the church either conforms or transforms. It either conforms to the culture that it's in, or it transforms the culture that it's a part of. And that's the key thing. And we want it to see transformation. Okay. Okay, a few thoughts about transformation. I see my master of my MC is smiling at me now. I need to move quickly. Bear with me. The Chinese proverb, I'm sure you've all heard, but I want to put it in context here. It says this: give a man a fish and he has food for a day. Okay, and I would call that relief. Okay, there's an appropriate place for that in a crisis or a disaster and so on. But there's still too much aid happening that really does not benefit. It's relief. Teach a man to fish and he has food for a lifetime. And we could call that development. And that's a step better. That is, I think, what many of us try to be involved in, and that is capacity building, it's empowering, it's seeing development take place. But then the third one, and this is, I think I'm getting this from Darrow Miller, he suggested this, and he said, empower a man to think about fishing in a new way, and his life will be changed forever. Okay, and I think that's where we need to move to. How do we, that's transformation. How do we think differently about the things we've always done? Okay. So change, we want, how does change happen? It's not just information, it's also the information as it connects with revelation that we get. So from the head to the heart, and then it goes out to transformation. Change is always moving from the inside to the outside. And so often we try to do things from the outside and we hope the inside will change. It doesn't work that way. And so we just need to remember that. Ideas have consequences. You all know that as well. We have to think that for transformation to happen, they say socially that between 15 or 18% in any community or society, if somebody starts doing something and models that and talks about it, the rest of the community will adapt and adopt it, okay, if it's a good thing. So it takes about 1 in 5 people. So my thinking is 1 in 5. I think we can do that. If I have 5 people around me and I can influence them, for example, I did it, simple little example here, okay? In Dakar, where I lived, okay, I was perceived as an older man, okay? But I had a sidewalk around my house, so I swept it. Old men in Dakar do not sweep the sidewalk. But I decided, no, this is a value, this is my house. I want to model personal responsibility. So I decided to sweep. I had many women come and try to take the broom off me and fight me for it because that's a woman's job. I said, no, I'm going to do it. After several years, I noticed numbers of people in my community before we left with men, older men, were sweeping their things. It can be done. It's simple little things. Okay. Now I'm not making a big deal out of sweeping. It's just one little principle. Okay. But it's the idea that happens. Also, it's good to remember that evolutionary change is usually better than revolutionary change. Okay, where revolutions have taken place, it never ever transforms society. But evolutionary change, small changes in there. So here's a few factors very quickly that people who have researched where this kind of transformation has happened from in the church context into society. Okay, one is persevering leadership is needed. Okay, where there's a vision and a passion and leaders don't give up. I have an example of a country in North Africa where couple of decades ago, we started a prison ministry working with the various prisons in the country. We had all authority to work in the prisons. The project leader was assassinated in the country, but the team had taken enough hold of it that they never gave up. And they're having tremendous influence in the prisons in that particular nation. I won't tell you which nation it is. Secondly, prayer. They said everywhere where transformation has taken place, there's fervent, persistent prayer, united. Okay? And I don't need to give you a message about that. Social reconciliation and cohesion needs to be present, where the church and ministries are relevant to the needs. I can give you one example in a North African country where in my agricultural background, I was there as part of doing the research for a project that we wanted to start. And we wanted to do something with the agriculture, with the farmers. And what we needed to discern what were the felt needs. And so one of the things we found, I was asking the farmers, why do your cows die? And the conclusion was not because of a disease or they needed a vaccination program, which is what the Ministry of Agriculture in the country wanted us to do, which would be very expensive and we didn't have the money for it. But we discovered, the farmers told us, most cows in the village die from choking on plastic bags. Okay, so here we could do, they choked, eating plastic bags and they choked, you know, so very simply, we could begin to clean up the garbage. That was how, so understanding the felt need of the community. Another one was in the school. We noticed there was about 50, 55 children in the school. There was only 2 girls, all the rest were boys. It was a Muslim community. So we thought, well, it's probably because they don't want their girls to be educated. When we asked the questions, we discovered none of those reasons. It was because there was no toilet at the school. So for the boys was no problem, but the girls, we can't go to school. So we built, part of our project, we built 2 toilets, one for the boys, one for the girls. And the last time I heard from the village, there was more girls in the school than boys. So simple little things that say we can make a change in the small things. Okay, power encounters is a key one also. I'd love to give you another story of a country where a couple went. They said, we'd like to serve you. And this is in a country close to where many of you have been, Malawi. It's not Malawi, but it's close there. The elders of the town said, no, we don't know what you could do here. We don't really need you. But the AIDS epidemic was flowing through there. They didn't know what to do. This couple had been trained. And after 1 year, the elders called them and said, we have something for you to do. If you're prepared to bury the dead, we would like you to do that. So this couple took that on, and they told me they would bury between 7 and 10 dead people a week. And they did that for a long time. And then they began to ask questions about their culture. And they found 2, and I'm not going to share them here because they're quite personal, but I think we need to talk about it. But they were sexual practices that were practiced amongst them that spread AIDS very quickly. And they said, why do you do that? Well, we've always done it this way. This is tradition. And And so they said, well, would you consider not doing it anymore? So after many years, they decided that this is what they're going to do. They began to follow the values of the kingdom. They changed their practices. And after 15 years of this couple being there, they felt God leading them somewhere else. And it was now a Christian community, in a sense, where they had were able to change the culture and the way of thinking. Okay. And then lastly on that, the spiritually strategic methods. Are we doing relevant things, and are we doing it together with others in partnership? I have 4 quick points. They have to be quick now. Are we all right? Still MC? Yeah. Okay. 1, this is possible steps towards transformation. 1 is we need to discern the times. And this is more, I've got a number of scriptures here. I'm not going to take time. I think the one that you know the best would be Esther, the story of Esther, and where Mordecai, her uncle, said, don't you know, for such a time as this, I've called you. And you'll have to go on the website and get the other scriptures. Okay. Secondly, we need to rediscover the focus of the kingdom. If we look at what Jesus said, here's a little book printed by published by my brother-in-law, actually. It says, what did Jesus say about the church? And we open it up, table of contents, in the Gospels. Okay, we look at Matthew, and we have 2 verses. We look at Mark, nothing. Luke, nothing. Gospel of John, nothing. That's what the kingdom, that's what Jesus said about the church, sorry. Okay, we turn the book around. What did Jesus say about the kingdom? Okay, open it up, same introduction, outline. Kingdom in Matthew. These are all verses. Kingdom in Mark, Luke, John. Okay. You see the stark difference. Okay, and I think we need to begin thinking the church is important. The church is key. The church is just a reality of what the kingdom is. And we need to re-understand and have an appreciation. What is the kingdom? It affects every part of our life, not just the church. And so we need to be looking at that. And there's, again, all the kingdom verses, many of them you know, and so on. When the kingdom, when you have these 3 things, you will begin to understand this is probably the kingdom. When there is order, okay, when there's beauty and abundance, those 3 things, they're always indicators of the kingdom. And the opposite then would be true when you have chaos, ugliness or tidiness, untidiness, and poverty. Okay. Thirdly, we need to reaffirm the key foundations. Okay, and I can't do justice to this, so I'm going to let you just read the notes later. But I think we need to begin to accept, particularly in the political world, but in the business world, and that is as well, is that that the law of the people or the rule for all of society has to be God's law. There must be an affirmation and understanding of the intrinsic value of human dignity. Okay, and that we have human rights that are not given to us by any government, but they're God-given. Just a few things there. And then lastly, we need to develop leadership, relationship, and partnership. Okay. If we want to see transformation in the communities, then we must see leaders rise up as people of integrity and model personal transformation first. Only as we as leaders are transformed and modeling that will others look to follow us. This is what Nelson Mandela said so often. And I think of my own leadership and I think, what am I thinking of? This is what he says about leaders. He says, poor leaders, they talk about people and problems. Okay, just think about how much time you spend talking about people and problems in your leaders' meetings and so on. Okay, and those come out of the past. Okay. Average leaders talk about projects and events. Okay, that's the presence, is what you're doing right now. And he said, great leaders talk about ideas and possibilities, the future. So this is where we need to do all three of those, okay, in our leadership roles. But we should be spending the greatest part of our leadership focused on ideas and possibilities. What can be done? How can change happen? How can transformation happen? Okay. So it's said that the 20th century missionaries did one thing right in Africa. They planted churches and schools and hospitals as well, it has to be said. But Africa has over 175 million evangelicals and over 1.5 million churches. Whatever may be its deficiencies, Africa's church is growing and in maturity and poised for action. And we must see them rise up to take this on. The capacity of leaders is there to influence their nations. So the big picture in conclusion, I think the question we have to ask is there hope for Africa? And I, for one, absolutely, without any doubt, say, yes, there is hope for Africa. The kingdom is coming. It's already here. We can see it. And we just need to spark that flame and see the kingdom come and see a new and transformed Africa. But we can only do it together. Thank you. I apologize for going longer. I should know I very often do that. I have too much stuff, but there we are. I will post that on the website. In fact, I'll put that in the chat right now is the website that you can go to should you need it. I hand the mic back to the MC.